U.S. President Joe Biden has announced his pick for the new ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. Burns is currently an international relations professor at Harvard University. He has served the U.S. government for 27 years and capped his career by working as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs between 2005 and 2008. He was U.S. ambassador to NATO from 2001 to 2005, and before that, he served as State Department spokesperson and ambassador to Greece. He also worked for the National Security Council at the White House under then Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Why is Mr. Burns U.S. President's top choice in terms of ambassador to China amid strained relations with China? And how can he manage the challenges after he comes into office, if he comes into the office? For answers, let's loop in our panelists. We're still trying to link up to the U.S. guest, but for now, let me go to you, Professor Dingli from the Institute of International Studies with Fudan University based in Shanghai. Professor Xian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Your first reaction to the nomination?
Well, I think this is a great pick. As at this time, the U.S. needs someone from America who has trust, confidence of the U.S. president. That merit should also be coupled with a diplomat's professionalism. Oftentimes, the U.S. would pick up some pure political appointee. Even though Mr. Burns is also a political appointee, but he has a rich, he has a career diplomat history covering 27 years. That's a great richness for him and for America. So these two facts makes him to be picked.
You, of course, is a very well-known figure in terms of China-U.S. studies. In your circle, from the Chinese side, for example, is there much respect for Mr. Burns, both when he was a career diplomat and then later in the academic world?
To what I know, that has been the case. Mr. Burns has been responsible for U.S. State Department's political affairs with the world, covering Asia and China as well. And he has often spoken in a solid, cautious, diplomatic manner to show his respect and U.S. respect to China with the previous U.S. presidents. As a professor of international relations at the Harvard's Kent JFK School, he has also been teaching his students and also being quoted as being cautious, diplomatic, and speaking with great balance. He has also often expressed his view to respect China and work with China, of course, with the U.S. in the U.S. interest.
Well, it seems a lot of compliments from your side, at least, for the possible U.S. ambassador to China. Now I'm joined on the phone by Douglas Paul, a distinguished fellow from the Asia program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr. Paul, great to have you on the program. Your first response about this nomination?
Well, Nick Burns is a major part of the Washington foreign policy establishment and was chosen, I'm sure, because he's sober and balanced and will reflect the priorities of the Biden administration faithfully.
Now, from the Chinese side, we've been hearing, Mr. Paul, the Chinese spokesperson from the Foreign Ministry responding to the possible nomination from the U.S. side, a new ambassador to China. He said this, quote, "China hopes that the new U.S. ambassador to China will work to promote friendly cooperation between China and the United States and play a constructive role in promoting the healthy and stable development of China-U.S. relations." A lot of adjectives there, certainly good thinking and good hopes, but during the current circumstances, how much room do you think ambassador to China from the U.S. side could have?
Well, the joke would be the ceiling is unlimited because things have gotten so bad that he has a great scope for constructive activity. I think the initial phase will be trying to stabilize the current very low level of relations and try to rebuild those things that can be built. There are programmatic issues which have been discussed most recently by the Deputy Secretary of State visiting Tianjin with Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Xie Feng, where she talked about getting back the issue of visas for students and visas for journalists and working on consular relations, which I assume is a reference to the closed consulates in Houston and Chengdu. Just getting that work started will be enough to keep him busy, apart from his initial calls once he's arrived in Beijing.
Professor Xian, of course, at the same time, the new Chinese ambassador to the United States arrived in the U.S. For several weeks already. So far, according to his official Twitter account, there seems to be quite a number of goodwill gesture to the great American people as Chinese ambassador to the United States. So how do you see the styles of future ambassadors from both countries to each other are likely to have as a result of the current challenging circumstances of the bilateral relations?
I think both ambassadors represent their country and their presidents. Therefore, they should do what their country wants them to do. As our new ambassador Chen Gang to the U.S. has stated in his first Twitter after landing in the U.S., he wants China-U.S. to rediscover, to re-recognize, and also to re-respect. So his catchword is understanding, respecting, and recognizing. That's great. But that's not only for U.S. to understand China, respect China. Mr. Chen Gang should also make China to understand, respect, and appreciate America as well. I think for the possible U.S. next ambassador to China, he would do the same for America. But both ambassadors should also be the representative of their presidents. So at this time, both presidents have stated that they are ready to cooperate whenever they can. But of course, when other countries try to compete, we hope to compete healthily, but we would compete anyway. And at a time when the other side would rival with us, and we are ready to do. So the ambassador should also follow the order of the president, compete and cooperate and possibly conflict. And they are ready to serve each of their nation in these 3 Cs.
Mr. Paul, of course, the nomination of Mr. Burns is at a time when there has been relatively very little direct high-level contact, at least in public domain, that we know about between China and the United States. Now, as Professor Xian earlier mentioned, the top leadership diplomacy is very crucial now for the both countries. So this is interesting that these 2 ambassadors arriving at each other's country at a time when they need to prepare the most for any possibility of top leadership meeting or interaction.
Well, that's true. There was more of a possibility of the 2 leaders possibly meeting in Rome or Glasgow in late October, early November this year. That now seems less likely because of the return of COVID Delta form. And so I think actually the important thing is not really the high-level meeting. Those will be important when they occur. But to recognize this is a structural friction between these 2 countries. One individual can't do very much. On the other hand, one individual can do a lot of harm if he's not constructive and tries to find opportunities to fix things where they can be fixed. And I think that, therefore, you should see Burns arriving, as Chen Gang has done in Washington, with a view to getting down to basics and attending to things that can be practically done constructively in the midst of a very strong sense of competition.
Now, we have seen some common topics. It seems that both China and the United States need to pay attention to together. I'm not sure whether it's real cooperation, but certainly there's possibility of cooperation. For example, on climate change, on the carbon issue, and also now emergingly on the issue of Afghanistan, even though it is very tricky right now, nobody knows where it is going. So from both of you, Mr. Paul, Professor Xian, what's your assessment of how much career diplomats will be able to be the bridge in order to make some possibilities become realities, Mr. Paul?
Well, I think in the U.S. we're going through a process of review. People in the administration say the reviews should be complete in mid-September. And I think after that you'll start to see programmatic statements coming out of the U.S. Giving scope to those areas of possible cooperation. Yes, I think the U.S. would want to see Afghanistan on the list of areas of cooperation once we get past the current immediate crisis. And the other things that you've mentioned will also be there. Again, professional diplomats put their shoulder to the wheel and try to move the wheel along. But you should have limited expectations for results in the initial phase. And for the Americans, that initial phase starts sometime after mid-September.
After mid-September, Professor Xian, Chinese side, what's your thought?
Well, an ambassador traditionally would understand the country he is posted and to get their view and information and sometimes intelligence and to convey them to the countries that post him. And then give his and his colleagues' analysis to his own leaders and then to implement the order from the headquarters. For this, the ambassador could do a lot to understand the country he is posted and to get their view back to the capital. That does not mean he agrees or disagrees. His job is to collect and to reflect. But then he could give good analysis, not ill analysis. But then when implementing the order from a headquarters, the way he handle, he interact to show his respect to the hosting country and his personal charisma sometimes can help. But therefore, there's a limit an ambassador can do, but sometimes the ambassador can do a lot.
All right, great analysis from both of you, very seasoned analysts on China-U.S. relations. We hope we'll have more opportunity to talk to both of you because that means there are more issues going on in China and the United States for one another. Thank you so much, Douglas Paul, Shen Dingli, for being with us.